So in this video, I'll break down why dampeners don't work to reduce tennis elbow. We'll go into the physics, I'll show you some studies, and at the end, I'll give you my recommendations on how to actually go about tennis elbow. So let's take a look at what's going on. If we have a ball traveling towards our racket, then it has mass and momentum. And as soon as it hits the string bed right there, we have contact, two forces occur. One of them we can call shock. So that's that ball hitting that string bed, and that shock transmits into the frame and then eventually gets absorbed into our arm. And the aftermath of that shock, the residual effects are vibrations. So when that ball contacts, 99% of the forces go into shock, and only about 1% turn into vibrations. And that's vibrations of the string and the frame of the racket. So the shock occurs really fast. As soon as that ball hits the strings, that force gets transmitted into the frame. The strings and frame absorb about 90% of the shock forces. So if a ball is traveling at 50 miles an hour and it hits our racket, that's about 225 pounds of forces going into the string and racket. And 90% of that gets absorbed by the string and racket. That means that 5 to 10% of those forces, so about 22 pounds of forces, travel up through the racket, into the wrist, and into the elbow. So these are the actual forces that contribute towards our injury. It's not the vibrations, the 1% of that shock. It's the shock, the 99% of that ball's velocity and momentum hitting the racket. Then the strings and racket absorb 90% of that, and the rest of that 10% travel up through the handle into our wrist and elbow, and that's about 22 pounds of forces when a ball is traveling at 50 miles an hour. So how a dampener actually works is it reduces vibrations, that 1%, but it does nothing to affect shock. So if it's only affecting that 1% of what's contributing to the forces going on in the wrist and elbow, then now you can see that how insignificant of a result that could be. So let's dive into what that actually looks like. So the job of a dampener is to absorb those vibrations, also called oscillations. A dampener on the strings reduces that string vibration by 10 to 20%, but the string vibrations only represent 1% of the total impact of the energy. Therefore, we can expect the dampener to only reduce the total energy reaching your arm by 0.1 to 0.2%. So a very insignificant amount. So again, going back here, once that shock occurs, the vibrations, what I mean by that is there's vibrations going on in the strings, and there's also some vibrations going on in the racket frame as well. That's only 1%. So a dampener helps to reduce 10 to 20% of that 1%, meaning that in total shock amount to the wrist and elbow, it only reduces the forces by 0.1 to 0.2%. And that's exactly what some studies found right here. So a 2015 study found that dampener reduced string oscillation but had minimal effect to no effect on vibrations. So the conclusion was that dampeners only change the sound and the feel of the racket, but they don't reduce the impact forces. Another study found the same exact findings, that the shock forces are what actually overload the tendons in the elbow, not the string vibrations. So if the dampener is reducing string vibrations but not the total shock, then it's not doing anything for us to reduce tennis elbow. But some people do report improvements with a dampener. So what's going on there? One part of that is the placebo effect. So if we believe a dampener is going to help reduce our pain, then that belief in the dampener helps us to actually get results. So that's what we call a placebo effect. The mind-body connection is real. If we believe something will work, there's a higher chance of that working and actually for the elbow to start feeling better. That doesn't mean we're doing anything in terms of the physiology or the physics to reduce that tennis elbow. It's just how we feel. And also, some people prefer how the racket feels with a dampener on, so that contributes to feeling better and having a better experience. So this is a difference between perception versus reality. So now that you know that dampeners don't work in terms of tennis elbow, what are some things that we can do to reduce that stress and strain that we feel on our elbow? So the first thing I would look at is making sure we have the proper technique. From there, I would adjust the grip size to make sure that it's correct and frequently change our overgrip so we have the right texture and grit. From there, I would address the tendons, so doing strengthening exercises to start rehabbing and strengthening that tendon to reduce your pain. And in terms of equipment, what helps here is having a racket with a less stiff frame, having string tension decreased, and having a heavier racket with a heavier swing weight. All of that helps to absorb more of the shock forces and the impact. That way, more is absorbed through the racket and less forces go through your wrist and elbow, hopefully reducing injury and your pain. I hope this video helped you guys. Stay tuned for the next videos. Thank you for watching.